Welcome everyone. My name is Ray, as you know, and today I'm going to do something really different. I'm at the War Remnants Museum in what was District 3, Ho Chi Minh City. And today I'm going to talk you through a visit to the entire place. It's going to go for a long time, but you know, for those of you who have never been, it'll give you some insight into what this place is really like. The War Remnants Museum is essentially the Vietnamese story of the war. Now, when we talk about war has three sides. It has the two sides of the war. In this case, it was the Allied forces, or the USA, and the Vietnamese side. And then there's a story in the middle. Which one's right is up to who you believe and what you study, what you believe, basically what you believe in yourself. I suppose the War Remnants Museum is more about the Vietnamese story and what they believe happened. As you enter the front gates and pay your ticket, which is a whole like $2, you come in here and there's all these planes, tanks. To the right-hand side, you have a Chinook helicopter and a tank. And then further back, you have a, armoured personnel carrier and a bulldozer of all things, which are from the Vietnamese side of the equation. On the left-hand side, however, you have some airplanes that have been taken from the US Army. No doubt the machinery that were left by the US at the end of the war. We have what I believe is I do know it. It's not a Cessna, is it? But it's a single-engine propeller plane, which they use mainly as a spotter plane. Here we go. It's a U-17. It is a Cessna, actually. Sorry, I made it wrong. So I said it wrong. So yeah, we got a Cessna. We've got a Iroquois helicopter, which were the most popular helicopters in the Army for the US Army during the war. And this here has been, would I say it's original? Probably not, but you know, the remnants that it was taken from is basically, yeah, it's from the war, and it's really good to see. On a very personal note, I actually have a picture of a Iroquois helicopter on my back, tattooed on my back. It's a very long story, and I find the planes absolutely fascinating. Then we got an old Spitfire, which I didn't know Spitfires were used during the war. During the Vietnam War, I thought they were very much a World War II plane, but there must have been a few Spitfires, especially in the early days. Then we got a jet fighter. Jet fighter it's an F-5A jet fighter, F-5, which is a precursor to the F-111, of course. Early days of the fight. They were pretty good plane, apparently, from what I know about aviation. They were pretty quick, and they certainly did their job during the war. So that's in the courtyard of the museum. It's a strange welcoming, because when we go inside, you'll see the impact that it has on people. And you probably hear it now. Even though I've been here 3 or 4 times, you'll still hear the impact that it has on people like me when I visit. Right, so it's time to go inside. As you walk up the front stairs, for me, there's a lot of anticipation. If I think back to my first visit here some 13 years ago, I remember the anticipation was great. As I said earlier in my comments, this is very much the story of Vietnam. You don't have to like it, you don't even have to agree with it, but you need to respect it. In the bottom hall of the museum, it's very ornate, very basic. There is a seating area, which is more of a recent improvement. There never used to be seating here. And they play some propaganda films, or I shouldn't call them propaganda films, but they for the day they were classed by Westerners as propaganda films. Just showing the story of Vietnam. Moving over to the back, there is a lot of pictures and a lot of short stories that talk about the relationship of Russia to Vietnam, the Americas to Vietnam, and Africa to Vietnam. You know, there's a whole lot more to Vietnam than just the Vietnam War. One particular country that has had a big association with Vietnam is Cuba. And here on the bottom floor is a little bit of the relationship between Cuba and Vietnam. Being both communist-based countries, they have maintained a political and civil union over many, many years, and still today they do have a close tie in many regards. Looking further ahead, so we got here some of the protests that happened in Europe. Now, what we know is that, especially after the Tet Offensive of 1968, and things got really serious in Vietnam with the US Army, they deployed, I think it was 75,000 troops to try and end the war quickly. The world reacted very adversely. And throughout America, certainly my home country in Australia, and indeed throughout Europe, in France, Finland, Italy, the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Switzerland, Norway, Sweden, they all had protests to bring this war to an end. And the whole world was against it because the whole world knew that the war was futile, it had no purpose, and there was never going to be a good outcome. And the protests happened globally to stop the war, but unfortunately governments didn't listen for many years, and as a result some 3 million people died. Just moving back across out of the first ground floor display of photos, you've got a gift shop. As far as gift shops goes, that's actually pretty good. They do actually have quite a bit of information relating to the purpose of this museum, being Vietnam and the war. Let's go upstairs, eh? As you might be able to hear, many languages here, many foreigners, all the tourists that come to Vietnam, come to Ho Chi Minh City at least, they make this a point of contact, a place to visit, to see, to learn. For some, it's very emotional. For others, a learning experience. You will not walk out of this place without learning something. It's one thing I can absolutely assure you. All right, up to level 1. One of the first very big, impactful displays is the war crimes. Entering the war crimes, as you might be able to hear, there must be a good 200, 300 people here at the moment. The place is packed. And in the war crimes area, they talk about things that happened. If I take you to the back wall as an example, and we look at these pictures of very distorted, blurry pictures of a Iroquois helicopter flying. And what it actually shows you is American soldiers take the Vietnamese soldier up into the air, threatening, and then when they have got what he wants, they push him out of the helicopter and let him fall with his hands tied to his death. Barbaric, unable to be, how do I put it, unable to be given an excuse or justified in any way. It's just the most horrendous view, and this is what happened during the war. Unfortunately, the Americans don't want to admit to this happening, but it did, and this is the reality of war. As I said outside earlier, you don't have to like it, you don't even have to agree with it, but you must respect that these things did happen. Moving along, we'll go to the back wall, and there are 2 of the most amazing photos. Here, a GI from the 25th Infantry Division holding part of a corpse of a soldier that was blown up. What you see here is the leg of a Vietnamese man on the ground, and the soldier picking up what is essentially the upper half of what's his head and the skin from his torso. His entire body has been blown up, and it's just the most gruesome, awful picture. Your words, I fall short of giving it actual words to describe it. This occurred in Tay Ninh in 1967. Tay Ninh is a province north of Vietnam, about 100 kilometres to the north. There was a lot of fighting with the Americans against the North Vietnamese in that province. Moving to the right, we have an APC, an armoured personnel carrier, with the bodies of what appears to be two men being towed along the road. These bodies are basically naked, and assuming that they are both dead, just horrendous sights of the war. And this was how gruesome this war really was. It was one of the worst. Well, we can all say that every war is the worst because war shouldn't happen. But some of the atrocities that actually did happen here in Vietnam between 1965 and 1975 were documented, but unfortunately are rarely spoken about. And this museum highlights some of those atrocities in this way. Moving over to the right-hand side of the War Crimes exhibition, and we have numerous other stories and photos of war crimes and things that have happened. I'm just looking here in front of me, and I have what appears to be a bombshell that has exploded. And until you see it live, until you actually see it in person, you don't realise how catastrophic these bombs really are. Fragments about the size of a computer, up to the size of a seat chair, the chair of a seat. You know, these things were going through houses, going through buildings, ripping lives apart. It's getting very noisy in here, but that's because the place is so popular. Moving over to the far back wall in this area, I just look at the amount of death. A face mangled by poison, by Agent Orange, you know. One, I think it's either 2 or 3 children laying dead on a mat in the bush. More dead children, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dead children in Khao Mau in 1965, you know. 1972, US bombing. As we move over, I've got a picture, just disgusting. I can't look at this shit. And seriously, I can't look at it. A mangled body with a missing leg, laying on a old mat or something, sheet. A little boy with missing arm, missing leg. These are stories that cannot be justified. And then, in an awful conundrum, we look at firearms. You go from all these dead bodies to the things that killed them. Here we have firearms, guns, cannons, whatever. And this is the conundrum of this. It's the result of all this fighting, all this ammunition. And then on the other side, here are the guns that caused it. It's just, you know, a little bit scary. What's the word? This is why it's very difficult to do a podcast in a place like this, because I get so emotional that I find myself short of words. So as we leave the War Crimes section of the museum and head over to the Agent Orange section, it's time to look at more atrocities in a very different way. Now, what is Agent Orange? And Agent Orange was a chemical that was developed by an American chemical company, and we all know who they are. They're still around today. I don't need to mention their name. And it was seen as the wonder chemical that was going to flush out the North Vietnamese army out of the jungles. However, what it did for generations to come was catastrophic to the extreme. Let's go into the Agent Orange effects display and have a look at what they did. Now, Agent Orange is a little bit of a conundrum because they actually had Agent Blue, Agent Brown, Agent Green, I think it was. There were like 5 or 6 different chemicals that they used. It wasn't just Agent Orange. And the idea with the Agent Orange was that it was literally a kill all. So what they would do is they would go across the jungle where the North Vietnamese army was said to be hiding, and they would spray this Agent Orange, this chemical, the range of chemicals, onto the foliage. And within a day or two, it basically stripped the trees of all its foliage and removed the hiding places of the enemy. But what it really did was, for the next 2 generations, not only is there the human cost, but just the even here we are, 50 years since the end of the war, 60 years since they started dumping this stuff on the ground, and the effects of the chemical are still being found today. It's quite logical that food that I've consumed living in Vietnam for 12 years has been tainted with this Agent Orange chemical, because it's still in the soil. It's it's still finding its way into the food chain, and it's still affecting people. On the people side of it, what it has done, and I'm looking at some photos here, it's created enormous deformities in people. People with heads that are 4 size, the 4 size is the normal size. We've got babies born without limbs. We've got, there's one picture here that I do remember from a long time ago. A child was born with a penis out of his back, coming out of his backbone. Enormously hard to see, and if you travel around southern Vietnam, if you look around Ho Chi Minh City enough, you will still see children today that are suffering from the effects, because their grandparents were exposed to this chemical some 50 or 60 years ago. So here we go. I found the display now that says what was actually dumped from 1961 to 1971. We have Agent Pink, Agent Green, Agent Purple, Agent Orange, and Agent Orange 2, which they called Super Orange, which was 61% of the total amount of poison sprayed. And then we have Agent White and Agent Blue. Together, they were all the chemicals sprayed by the Americans in order to flush out the North Vietnamese. They tried really well, they tried really hard, but it didn't work. The Vietnamese still found their way around it. Moving around to the next display, we have more pictures of babies and adults with deformities of birth. They're just too hard to mention, I suppose. Here we have if I go to the back corner, try and get a moment of peace, a nameless baby girl born in May of 2000 in Ho Chi Minh City and abandoned in the Tu Du Hospital, suffers from a craniofacial dysostosis, I can't say that word, a typical type of syndrome as a result of Agent Orange. And looking at this baby, she has a very, very large head. Her eyes are almost literally popping out of her head, like physically popping out of her head. She looks like, I suppose we want to give it a word, she looks like some weird Martian from outer space. With her life expectancy would be, less than 20 years, of course. She probably would be, being 2000 that this photo was taken, she's probably dead by now. And that was in 2000. Remember, they stopped dropping the chemical in 1971. So it was quite logical that it would be the granddaughter of somebody that was exposed to the chemical back in the 1960s that would have suffered this fate. And this is the problem with Agent Orange. It literally can be second and third generation. It's quite possible that the daughter or son, most likely the daughter, of the person exposed did not have any side effects, but carried the malformed genes through to her daughter, who was born in such a way. Over to the far side, There are more photos. A picture of a little boy without arms trying to draw with his feet. And I suppose what we don't see here is that there was actually many Americans. Yeah, there's actually many Americans that were also affected in the same way, with their children being born with deformities. Completing our level 1 experience is a very small display of when war memories are told through art. Art is a very strange word, I suppose. People look at art as a sign of pleasure. And entering the hall, you know, you have to remember that war is an era of life, and be able to put that into conceptual artistic forms represents a period of time, a period of history. And as I enter, I see some rather abstract paintings, I suppose, if you want to call them that, and different forms of art. There's one here with swirls of colour and triangles, and the impression of what appears to be Vietnamese people wearing gas masks. Very abstract view. Moving over to the front side of it, we're going to have some drawings. One is of an uprising, which looks like a jail of some type. We know the Hanoi Hilton, as it was at the time, and there are other jails in the south of similar note that were run by the Americans, most notably Kwandao Island, Phu Quoc Island, and places off the south coast. And so many jails held prisoners from both sides of the war. It's a part of the time, and it needs to be depicted in art as much as it is in photos and videos, because as we know, the Vietnam War was the first war that was actually played out on TV. It was the first TV war. So as we know, that the Vietnam War was the first war that was actually played out on TV. And so we have a lot of video and photos from that time to accurately depict what happened. But showing it through art is a good way of remembering the feeling, I suppose. I'm not a very artistic person, but I do appreciate the portrayals of the pain that was suffered by both sides. On this side, it's suffered by the Vietnamese people when their country was invaded by an adversary. So that is the art related to the American War. You know, I suppose in a way I shouldn't be calling it the Vietnam War, because as we know, Vietnamese people don't call it the American War, the Vietnam War. They call it the American War because it was certainly Americans came to Vietnam. As a Westerner, we've always known it to be the Vietnam War because Americans went to Vietnam to fight Vietnam. But it wasn't the Vietnam War at all. Vietnam never wanted the war. It was the Americans who put it on. Up to level 2, we have a thing called the Requiem, a photo collection of war correspondents who died in action in Indochina. Indochina being what is now known as basically Southeast Asia. This is probably one of my favourite displays because this is where, you know, the photos of the war, these really close-up depictions of what really happened, are displayed. As I move over to the left-hand wall, numerous photos of a range of different things, from, you know, a farmer ploughing his rice field with army trucks passing by, to tanks sitting in fields with aeroplanes flying past, soldiers marching through the open fields, patrolling. Up here is two very good photos in the back corner. I've got a little baby sitting on the ground playing with a piece of paper while the soldiers walk past and just ignore it. And right beside that, I've got a little boy, probably 4 or 5 years old, crouching down, a little Vietnamese boy. And the photo is taken between the legs of an American soldier and his army boots. And the boy's just looking aimlessly through his legs at the camera lens. Below that, we have Vietnamese people captured in the jungle by soldiers. Moving back around, go further into the display. More photos. One of my favourite photos here is of the Iroquois helicopters landing, and there's literally hundreds of them in a row. It's like a super highway, because as we know, it was the helicopters in the American War that were the key to the movement of the Allied forces, the Americans and Australians, New Zealanders and the rest of the countries. But it really set up a different format as opposed to World War II. They did things differently. They attacked differently. They defended differently, because the Iroquois was really a super machine for its time, and probably testament to it because, you know, some of them are still flying today, and certainly after the end of the American War, America kept the Iroquois for quite some time before it was replaced by better technology. And still today, whilst it's old, it's now 60 years old, it still holds its own as a really good flying machine. Moving over to the right-hand side of this display, many photos. And going back to photos from downstairs, there is a photo here of a Iroquois, which is idling above the ground. And there's a body of a man, I'm assuming a North Vietnamese soldier, that has fallen out or been pushed out of the helicopter, and is falling to his death. Terribly graphic, but very real at the same time. Go around the corner and we've got villagers escaping up a dirt road. Kind of looks a bit like Taming to me, in the north, a place I've been to many times. And just above that, we've got the Americans having a service for the dead American soldiers. They got their boots on the ground with their guns, I'd assumed, pierced into the dirt, and their GI helmets there, and they're having a prayer service or something for the dead. Many pictures of American GIs, Vietnamese people, a couple of children there hiding under what looks like a canopy, makeshift tent. Just above that, we've got Vietnamese people, looks like carrying possibly dead bodies in a hammock on a pole across the field, recovering their dead. Also, the wartime was very much a transition from black and white to colour, and we have some colour photos of the war, and they're very beautiful, especially that early style colour, which had that very that orangey tinge to it. Now here we have people walking across a rice field carrying equipment. Looks like locals, could be soldiers, who knows. Two ladies walking through a rice field with a non-la. Because remember that even though there was a war in this country, people still had to eat, people still had to grow, farmers still needed to grow food to survive, because, you know, it was essential to have food in order to keep going. More colour photos in the right-hand corner. A couple of black and white ones of a boy and a man sitting in the grass with the dog in the background. There's a channel of water behind him, and the man is clearly affected by the war. It's like he's lost his arms. This is the carnage. Agent Orange, there's a boy here in what is basically just a pair of underpants. Maybe he's about 12 years old, and he is standing in a mangrove that has been sprayed by Agent Orange. And it's just nothing but brown sticks. You know, all the foliage is gone. And that was in 1976, which was a year after the war ended. This is the impact that this stuff has had. You know, stuff didn't grow in these areas for years after they were sprayed, which affected crop growth, affected the ability for Vietnamese people to grow their own food. It affected their productivity. It affected their health. It affected everything, you know, and it was just awful. So that is the photo exhibition of the War Remnants Museum on level 2. The next area that we are going to look at is the historical truce. Now, I really like this particular display because this is an unvetted story from the Vietnamese side. Now, you don't need to like it, you don't need to agree with it, but you have to respect it. And in this, I probably won't go too deep into the story of this, but it's very, very popular. Must be 150 people in here. There were a couple of grenade launchers, what are they called? Rocket launchers, sitting in the middle of the floor. In fact, there's 3 of them, the small one, the medium and the large one. This is the story from the Vietnamese side. And what it does, it steps through how they saw the war and how it affected them. So rather than going through and actually telling you that story, what I want to do is I want to give you some facts. So fact number 1, the number of soldiers that were in Vietnam from what they call the South Vietnamese Public Military Forces. Here are the numbers. We've got 1964 and 1972. If I look at 1965 as an example, we have 643,000 South Vietnamese. We have 184,000 Americans, 20,000 South Koreans, 2,000 Thai. We have 1,500 Australians, 70 Filipino, and 120 New Zealanders. We move on to 1971, 1972. 1971 is an interesting one because that was probably the last gasp effort of the Americans, and there was over 158,000 Americans sent to Vietnam in that year. Looking at my country, Australia, there were only 2,000. Probably the height of the war, we're looking at probably 1969, where there were 549,000 Americans sent to Vietnam. Almost 50,000 Koreans, almost 8,000 Australians, and 550 Kiwis amongst the others. So 1968 was the Tet Offensive, and 1969 and 1971 the Americans had a real dig, but they really lost. By 1971 they know they'd lost the war, and 1972 there was only 24,000 left, which basically protected Saigon. And as we know, 73 they got out, and by 1975 the South Vietnamese surrendered and the war was over. Looking at another display, the tonnage of bombs that were dropped by the US on Vietnam on a year-by-year basis. Looking at only at South Vietnam, because they also bombed North Vietnam. In 1965, they dumped 30,000 tonnes, a total of 51,000 on the whole country. In 1968, in South Vietnam, 1 million tonnes of bombs were dropped. 1969, 957,000 tonnes. 1972 is interesting because even though the numbers had quite greatly dropped off, they still managed to drop 561,000 tonnes of ammunition on South Vietnam, with a total of 771,000 in the entire country. And that was whilst they were going through a great withdrawal of soldiers from the country. These are the facts that are really chilling to see because, you know, they really tell the story. If you could see this graph of the bombs and the variations on where they were dropped. And what this doesn't tell you is how Laos and Cambodia also were affected during this period. In the next graph, they have a comparative of World War II, the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And they look at how long it lasted. You know, World War II, 3 years and 8 months. Korean War, 3 years and 1 month. The Vietnam War, 17 years, 2 months. World War II, 5 million tonnes of bombs were dropped. Vietnam War, 14 million. It's almost 3 times the size. Just unbelievable. Killed, 58,000 Americans were killed, I believe it says. And the final display is, I suppose it's the end. It's the picture of the tank coming through the gates of Independence Palace on the 30th of April 1975, which ended the war. With that ending of the war, I suppose that is the ending of the story. It's a really good place to end, where you look at that picture of the tank coming through the gates of Independence Palace, crashing it down, symbolistically albeit, but they crashed down the gates and the war was over. Since then, Vietnam has had conflicts with China, had conflicts with Cambodia, and whilst all of them were reasonably minor in comparison to the American War, they have had small conflicts. Thankfully, in recent decades, certainly in the last 12, 13 years since I have been living here in Vietnam, Vietnam have not had any major conflicts with any country, albeit the tensions with China have been evident and occasionally rear their head out in a place called the Spratly Islands. So that is a look at the War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh City. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you've never been here, I hope my words motivate you to one day visit it. If you ever do come to Ho Chi Minh City or visit Vietnam, you do need to come here and see the Vietnamese story. Vietnam's story is Vietnam's story. It's not America's story, it's not Australia's story. It's Vietnam's story. And it needs to be listened to, it needs to be taken in, and it needs to be respected. It may not be a story that you agree with, especially if you are American, but it's the story that they have. It's their experience. And to learn it is a great learning experience for anyone who has an interest in the history of this country, the history of the world, and the history of America as well. And Australia for that matter, because as you know, Australia were heavily involved. Don't really tell many people is that before I was born, my father spent a year here, 1965 to 1966, with the Australian Army in Binh Hoa City, and Vietnam War was very much part of my upbringing. Vietnam was very much part of my upbringing. So when I look at these pictures, I take them very personally. And so when I see these photos, these displays and these stories, I take them very personally. And I really respect them. Maybe some of it is, well, not made up, but some of it is an alternate view, a different view, a view that maybe I don't agree with. But what I do know, it's their lived experience. Now there is the North and the South views, they vary slightly. People from the North and people from the South will have a different view. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, almost 3 million people died as a result of this conflict. It was started on a lie and it had no purpose. People died for no reason at all. And here I am, a generation later, standing here looking at this and wondering why, and just praying, hoping that it never happens again. That's the War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh City. Please come and visit it when you next visit Ho Chi Minh City. If you have any questions, please send me a note. You can find my contact details here on Spitfire, or if you look up an Aussie in Vietnam on YouTube or Facebook, you will find me there. I'm Ray, an Aussie in Vietnam, and see you next time. Bye-bye.